We wanted our kids to see the world, to experience communities, to experience diverse cultures. And so we didn't need to go to bucket list places. We just needed to go somewhere new and different and be curious.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Sharing Passion and Purpose podcast. My name is Nancy Moore, and I am the host of this weekly podcast that provides career and creative inspiration to help you build a passionate and purpose-filled life. You'll hear from guests that will help you tap into your creative potential, pursue a career with passion, and build on your biggest and best resource, yourself. I'm excited to have you join this conversation. I'm so happy you're here. Let's get started. Before we jump into this episode, I'd like to take a minute to let you know about my upcoming live events called Conversations with Passion and Purpose. The live events are meant for women, and they'll include entrepreneurs, change makers, young professionals, and college-age women, in an opportunity for them to come together in a space that will inspire, uplift, and generate community while promoting networking and support through connections in a small group atmosphere. To learn about future and upcoming events, make sure that you are following me on social media, Sharing Passion and Purpose on Instagram and Facebook, and LinkedIn, at Passion Sharing on Twitter. I will also be sending out emails, so if you want to go to sharingpassionandpurpose.com and sign up for Nancy's Nudge of Encouragement, that is a way that I connect with the community and send out positivity, and also it will keep you in the loop of upcoming events. So I hope that you join me there as well. Now, here's the episode. It isn't often that I have the opportunity to visit with the same guest twice, and I interviewed Ashley Campbell in 2015 and have just recently interviewed her again. And I think that you will agree that it's pretty amazing what she and her family just accomplished. So let me tell you a little about Ashley. When her first child was a toddler, it was happenstance that she ran across an article about a family who devoted a full year to traveling the world. That gives you a hint on what's to come. That article seemed to spark a belief in her that one day it might be possible for her and her family to do the same. She and her husband, Chris, talked about the possibility, and it became an idea that they really couldn't shake. Their desire grew in this idea, along with their family, to 5 children. The couple continued to save for the trip for many years. You'll hear about that in the podcast. And their dream became a reality in June of 2022, when she and her family embarked on a 1-year travel abroad adventure. Ashley shared her experience on her Instagram account. I was following along so closely. I loved seeing all that she had, that she was sharing. And her social media friends were treated to glimpses of the family's adventure through stunning photos and write-ups. And she shared details of the history of the area, many times where they were staying. It was just fascinating. And so our conversation visits with Ashley, and you'll learn more about how she was able to, and how this family of 7 was able to take a whole year out and travel the world, and what came of that, what they gained from their incredible journey. She was an absolute joy to talk with. She is incredible. I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Ashley. Okay, Ashley, I have followed you on your adventures, your year-long travel adventures with your family, and was in complete awe on how you pulled that off. It was just such a treat I felt like many times that not that I was there with you, but just getting a peek into your lives in different areas of really different continents, different, places around the world that you were. And I prayed for you too, and your safety and all of that, because that was a major deal. But welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned to you before we started recording, I had a girlfriend who also followed you, and we talked about how amazing it was that you were doing this year-long travel adventure with your family. And we were thinking, how did she do this? How much did it cost? How do you pack for a year? And all of that kind of stuff. But if you just start out by telling people a little about you and your family so they can get to know you guys a little bit better.
Yeah. So I'm married to my husband, Chris. He graduated from Union High School. I'm a BA graduate. It's a long time. Well, our whole lives here in the Tulsa area. We have 5 kids. They are 13, 15, 16, 18, and 20. So all teenagers. They were a couple years younger when we took the trip, a year younger. So yeah, we live in Broken Arrow and love being here.
Good, yeah. So Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Tulsa area.
Oklahoma, for sure.
Yeah, Tulsa specifically, this area.
Yeah.
Our entire lives, other than college and traveling for a year.
Yeah, well, it's a good place to be.
Yeah.
And you did return.
We returned.
You returned, so.
We knew we were going to return. There was never a question about that.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, so tell us what sparked this idea that you had to go on this year-long travel adventure.
So our oldest Corbett is 20 now. When he was a year and a half, 2 years old, I was flipping through a magazine. I can't remember the name of it, probably like a family fun magazine or something like that. And there was an article about a family, parents, and then 2 preschool, elementary age kids that they took a year and traveled the world. Looked very different because they had small kids, but I remember reading the article. Chris came home from work. He was working at Bluebell at the time. He came home and I was like, man, look at this article, read it. This would be an incredible thing to do one day. We both had been to other countries and loved traveling, so that desire to travel was already there, but we had never really thought, could you travel for a year with a family? So the article sparked it, and we kind of thought, oh yeah, we should do that. And then, a month or 2 went by, and it was just this idea that we couldn't shake. We kept thinking, we should really do that. And the more we talked about it, it just kind of flourished into this dream. We knew we wanted to wait till our kids were as old as possible. We didn't want to do it with young kids. We had no idea financially what that would even look like. There were no, blog posts about traveling the world with 5 kids. So we just decided really early on, we're going to live in such a way that's below our means, that we can put money back, and we're going to make all of our big and little decisions with this dream in mind. So after Corbett, we had 4 more kids, and it was always kind of like the background music to our family. Our kids grew up knowing, in this certain year, we're going to leave for a year, we're going to travel. The decisions we made related to like Christmas presents and birthday presents, we just kept everything simple, and they always knew we are living simply because we're saving for this really big dream. So yeah, it was probably about 17 years of dreaming and planning. Not ever really knowing, is it actually going to happen or not, but living in such a way that if the time came and we get to do it, we're prepared for it.
Okay, so the time came.
The time came.
So, right, but before the time came, I'm wondering about that planning process. So when the time came, you started, maybe talking to your family about where they wanted to go. Like, how does that look?
Yeah, so we decided the trip would take place when May after my oldest graduated. And so once we had that date set, about a year out, we started talking about, where we want to go, what we want to do. We knew we were going to be traveling on a budget, which means expensive countries, European countries would not work for us. I love the summer. I don't like cold weather. So we knew we were going to stay close to the equator. Packing also, if you're packing for warm climates, it's much easier than cold climates. You require less. So we kind of had a general idea. We're going to go around the globe, stay close to the equator. And then we just started asking the kids, like, hey, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And surprisingly, they didn't really have much input as far as specifics. They wanted to go to markets, they wanted to play basketball around the world, things like that. But as far as like, I really want to go to this country, they were very like, hey mom, just plan it. You know us, you know what we'll like, just do it. So we watched for plane tickets and decided we would start in Morocco, thinking if something happens and the trip gets cut short, we want to start far, because it would be easier. Central and South America would be easier to get to at a later date. So we thought we'll start far and go as long as we can, and if something happens and the trip ends, we'll come home. So we started with Morocco, and from there, really every decision was, okay, if we're in this city, what is the cheapest way to get to the next place, whatever that place is. So we didn't have a bucket list of, we want to go to these cities or these countries. It was really like we were in Tangier, Morocco, and at the time there's a ferry across the Strait of Gibraltar to Spain, and at the time it was about $45. Well, then there was a flight from the same city to Rome for $25 a person. So we were deciding Spain or Rome. Well, it's cheaper to go to Rome, so we went to Rome, and that's really how we planned the whole trip. It was just based on what's the next city we can get to cheapest. And that's where we went.
Wow. Okay. That's really cool. That I'm glad that you bring up that point about inexpensive travel when you are over in that area. My daughter did a study abroad in Rome, and she could fly. So that semester, it was kind of her goal. And this sounds really ostentatious, but she wanted to go somewhere every weekend. But to go fly somewhere for $25 or $40, and she was staying in a youth hostel or, with some friends, and they even split that and would split meals. It is so affordable once you're over there. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. But that's really cool. So I was thinking in my mind that you had a plan, an overarching, we're going to start out here and hit.
Nope.
Okay. So
we wanted to see the world. We wanted our kids to see the world, to experience communities, to experience diverse cultures. And so we didn't need to go to bucket list places. We just needed to go somewhere new and different and be curious. And so it really did not matter where we ended up. Our goal wasn't to see a list of certain sites. It was to find the community park and play basketball, wander into a bakery and meet people, ask questions. So by doing that, by being flexible with our destinations, it made the trip extremely affordable.
Yeah. So now are your kids homeschooled? I guess
they are homeschooled.
Okay. I was thinking for that year. Yeah. And then your husband could also, and you, because I know you had, because I interviewed you years ago with, your online business, but you both were flexible enough to take 1 year.
Yes.
Okay.
So my business is online, so everything was easy as far as working remotely. 2020 transferred a lot of jobs remotely. My husband did a lot of his work remotely during that time, so it opened up the possibility even more of this is feasible. So he continued to work part-time in kind of a remote position, so he worked the whole time. It was a little bit challenging as far as time zones and stuff like that, but he worked and I worked. And with homeschooling, since we knew for so long that the trip was happening, I actually planned the kids' curriculum ahead of time. So they got ahead on certain subjects, and then other subjects I knew they can do that when we get back. So we didn't do any technical schooling while we were traveling. So instead of, reading about the Roman Empire, we visited 8 different countries and saw the ruins of the Roman Empire. They were learning, but they weren't opening a textbook. Literally, the world became their textbook. It was really awesome.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing to be able to be there, and that's what sparks their interest is being there and seeing things and asking questions, and then they probably even want to research some other extra things on their own.
For sure.
From being able to do that. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. So do you have a favorite place that you really
We do
loved?
not.
You don't?
That is the impossible question for our whole family.
I was thinking
you
each person would have a different. No.
No. We visited 21 countries. 24 if you count. There's some debate in our family. We took a detour from Slovenia into Austria for 15 minutes. So I don't really count that. It was an accident. But 21 countries, and in each of those countries we tried to visit the capital, a like suburb-sized city, and then a really small community. So we just had so many diverse experiences in each country. It'd be like someone coming to the United States and visiting Tulsa, New York, and maybe, I don't know, a really tiny community in Oklahoma. It's such different experiences. So with all the different countries and all the different experiences within the countries, none of us, nobody has anything that stands out as their favorite. We loved so much of it.
Okay. Yeah. So when you have an experience like that, how does that change your perspective? You know, what have you seen with your children and their perspectives? What have you noticed from that?
I think one of the things that I've noticed the most is my kids have a different perspective of what is a successful life. Because we visited so many different cultures that define success differently, specifically differently than how we define it often in the United States. So as they're entering adulthood and they're thinking about what type of life do they want to have, what would be a successful life, what are their goals, I've seen a shift in that from before we left, which is a cool thing to see. I've also noticed that they are quick to spot false narratives. So if they see something on the news or somebody makes a comment about another country, another religion, they're really quick to notice things that are like, oh, that's not true of that place or that people group or that faith. So that's been really interesting and fun to see as well. Mm-hmm.
So the experiences that you had when I was following, there was one that really sticks out to me. And I'm hoping I remember this correctly, but it was a time where you could send the lanterns off. So if you'll tell us about that, because I thought, what an amazing experience. And I do want to talk a little more too about what you do, because the photography was amazing. Anyway.
Thank you.
Yes.
So the lanterns were in Chiang Mai, Thailand on New Year's Eve. That was probably one thing that one of my kids said, I would love to do this. Brees, my oldest daughter, when we were looking at the trip, she had seen a picture somewhere of a lantern release, and that was her. She really wanted to experience that. So I did some research and found out it was in Chiang Mai, and we planned our itinerary so that we would land in Chiang Mai in time for the lantern release. And when we got to town, we stayed at a lot of hostels. The hostel workers all told us, oh, there's no more lantern releases. They don't do that anymore. So then we visited different shop owners. They all told us the same thing. Oh, there's no more lantern releases. I joined local Facebook groups, which is a great thing to do when you're traveling and you want the inside scoop. Every community has a Facebook group. So I joined the Chiang Mai Facebook group and would use Google Translate. Everything said no lanterns. So we told Bruce, we're like, it's not going to work. They're not doing it anymore. So New Year's Eve, we went out into the community, did all the festivities. There's, street parties everywhere. And it was about maybe 10 minutes before midnight, and we saw a lantern floating in the sky. And we thought, could it be? So we were inside a park. We went outside in the street. We're waving down people, trying to ask, and this older man driving a tuk-tuk came up to us, and we, were trying to explain through signs and pointing at the sky, not having the language, asking about lantern releases, and he just waved at us to get in his tuk-tuk, which fit 3 people, so it was the 7 of us and him, and he just started driving crazy. I thought for sure we are going to get in a wreck through the back alleys of this little town, and he stops and we get out, and he like delivered us right where there's this huge crowd all holding lanterns. Somebody walked up, sold us a couple lanterns. Most of the crowd were tourists. I think that I'm not sure what's going on in Chiang Mai with the lantern releases. But so at midnight, we lit our lanterns with people from all over the world and celebrated the New Year that way. It was spectacular. And a core memory for my daughter. I think not just that she experienced the lantern, but that process of planning a trip to get there and then finding out it's not going to happen, and then randomly it happens, and it was a really fun experience.
That's amazing that you still went even despite hearing it's not going to happen.
Well, we were already in town.
Oh, okay.
We were already in Chiang Mai when we heard it wasn't going to happen.
Okay.
But our trip involved so much pivoting, just constant. When you're traveling internationally, you have to always just be prepared for the unexpected. So the kids were all really used to, okay, well, we got to pivot, make a new plan, we'll figure this out. So there was disappointment, I think, for her at first, but at the same time she knew, well, we'll just do something else. But it was a fun surprise that it worked out.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So what advice would you have for parents who are thinking about, probably not to this scale, but just traveling internationally with kids?
Yeah, so for our trip for the year, my kids were all teenagers, much older. However, when they were younger, we spent 8 weeks in China. So we've done both time frames with kids. And I would say my biggest piece of advice is to be flexible and to have zero expectations of the place and of your kids. I think also having a curious mindset and instilling that in your kids, knowing that there's going to be things that don't go right. Your kids are going to get tired, they're going to get hungry, and if you're approaching travel thinking everything's going to work out or it's going to be just like the United States, there's going to be a lot of unmet expectations that can be frustrating. However, if you're walking into a situation knowing, okay, I know my kids need rest and I know they need food, take care of those, even with teenagers. As long as we kept our kids rested and fed, they could handle all the uncomfortable parts. They could handle the change in diet and food. They had a much more adventurous spirit as long as they were rested and fed. So part of the rest for us was not doing a trip where we were go, 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 go every day. Sometimes the only thing we really accomplished that day was walking to the grocery store, buying groceries, and playing basketball at the park. We did not approach every day with, okay, we have to see these 5 sites and then get back to the hostel and sleep. And then the next day we're going to do these 5 things. I think traveling like that makes people exhausted, where after the trip they feel like they need another trip to relax from the trip they just took. Of course, for us, we were traveling for so long that we never felt the need to fit it all in. Most places we visited, I think I could probably get online right now and see all the things that we missed, but there was never, we don't walk into a city thinking, okay, this is our one shot, we have to see it all, and if we don't, then we've missed something. We more approached it as this, we're visiting a city for the first time. We want to meet people, we want to try the food. We know we're going to miss out on stuff, so we're not even going to attempt to fit it in. Instead, we're going to enjoy our time as a family, to sit at cafes longer. Our kids loved coffee shops. They're older, but some of our favorite memories are walking a couple miles through town, just wandering, sitting at a coffee shop and playing Monopoly Deal for a few hours and watching people come in and out. And so, yeah, I think my biggest advice is go slow and allow your kids to be curious, rested and fed.
Oh, that's great advice. Okay. So how did you handle the photography side? Because that's your business, and you are such a talented photographer and have such a good eye. My son will tell me, Mom, hang up and hang out. And I feel like you got some great pictures, but I also could feel that you were present with your family. And so how did you balance that, blogging or writing? Because you have a book coming out, but probably not for another year, but you have a book. So how did you balance all of that?
That's a great question. So I took my phone as my camera, and my son took his actual camera. For photography, for me, a lot of times it's a way to see detail. It slows me down. Sometimes I think people pick up a camera and they get lost behind it. For me, it's the opposite. When I pick up my camera, it causes me to pause and notice things sometimes in a new way. So as far as photography, I would go back and forth with my phone and his camera. The majority of my photos were with my phone, and I just pulled it out really quick, snapped a photo, and put my phone down. I think anytime you do something for a long time, you get quicker and better at it. So photography for me, I don't need my phone or my camera out very long to get a photo. I can pull it out, take a shot, put it up. So engaging with my family and kids is really easy, even while I'm taking photos, because I've done it for so long. And I typically know exactly what I want to capture. I also know that I don't need 30 pictures of this waterfall. I need one picture and I put it up. Or some things I know, like I know I will never look at a photo of this wall again, so I'm just going to enjoy it in this moment. Other times I know myself well enough to know this is something I want a photo of in our photo books or to print, so I'll pull my phone out, snap a quick photo. For me, photography is a way to notice details that I don't always notice otherwise. When I'm walking slowly down the street and I have my camera out, I'm noticing things in a way that is more intentional, and I'm real intentional about the photos I take. Instead of just snapping 30, I try to take one.
Yeah, that
answered that.
Yes, yeah, it did, because everybody has an iPhone or a cell phone, and just being able to capture that moment or that memory, I think, so they can have it later. It's interesting that you said that maybe there are some things that you just enjoy that's not really, photo worthy or whatever. Now, okay, I'm going to ask about the book, because were there some pictures that you thought of this would be great in a book? Was there a book deal before you went on the trip? Tell me about the book that's coming out in the next year.
Yeah, there was no book deal before the trip, and so when I was taking pictures, I was taking it with my phone, I was taking it with Corbett's camera. Sometimes I edited, sometimes I saved the original, sometimes I didn't. It was complete chaos. If I had known there was a book deal, I would have been much more organized and saved originals and probably thought through it more. So maybe it's good that I had no idea. I just took photos of what I wanted. When we got back from the trip, I knew I needed a way to process all that we had experienced. I knew my kids had a changed view of the world and of home, but I kept thinking, I want my grandkids to know these stories. I want my grandkids to experience the world the way we did. I want them to see the beauty of the world. So often the message is the world is on fire and imploding. That is not the world we experienced. We experienced this world full of gracious people, hospitable people. We were welcomed into homes in every country we visited. We met someone, a stranger, that invited us into their home. So I got back from the trip and thought, I just want my grandkids. I don't have grandkids right now. Future grandkids. I want them to know this experience that their grandparents and their parents and their aunts and uncles had. So we got back June 7th, and I gave myself a self-imposed deadline. I'm going to write a book by December 31st. There was no book deal. I don't have a literary agent. It was a way for me to process the trip. Surprisingly, when we got back, not many people asked about the trip. The question's usually, what was your favorite country? And that was about it. And so it was a healthy way for me to put all my thoughts to words. So I spent the first 6 months we were home writing, and then in January, after that rough draft had been written, I received a message from a publisher that had actually reached out to me several years before about writing a book. And I had told her then, I was like, I have nothing to write about. And she reached out again and she said, hey, I saw you wrote this book for your grandkids. I had talked about it on Instagram. Would you be interested in publishing it? And I thought, well, I probably need some editing. But so through that conversation and process, ended up signing a book deal. My original manuscript had 96,000 words, and I had to cut it down to 60. So the last 6 months were lots of editing and then going through photos. So when the book's released, it will be stories of our trip, things we learned. I also included trips for budget traveling, like how we actually were able to do it as a large family. What were the practical things before and during? So it's stories of what we learned from the different cultures, how we budget traveled, what it was like, our family dynamics traveling, 7 people for 24 hours, 7 days a week, how we walked through all of that. So now it'll be a published book.
Yeah, it's funny, and I don't know what you're going to say about this, but when I travel, I notice people with the biggest luggage, and I think they're not experienced travelers. You know, what's going on there? What's going on? So you probably had some ground rules with your family as far as, you know, taking a certain size bag. And then also, I know that you mentioned over that time that, you know, you're not buying these tchotchkes everywhere.
Yep.
You know, and you're not buying it all and mailing it home to sit at your home. So how did you kind of navigate that with kids?
Yeah, probably the only rule we had was everybody had a carry-on size backpack, and everybody had to carry their own bag. So one backpack for the year, and you had to carry it. So if you did any shopping while we were traveling, it had to fit in your backpack, which nobody could do any shopping. We also decided early on not to do any shipping anything home because that would get out of hand really quick with 7 people for a year. Each kid had their one backpack. I gave a few ground rules, like make sure you have a nice pair of pants and a nice shirt. There's museums, churches, stuff like that you need those for, and a swimsuit. Other than that, they were teenagers, so I just said pack your own bag. One of my sons filled his bag with a lot of camera gear. Another packed a basketball and a pump. So he had just a little bit of clothes, and he fit his basketball and pump. And honestly, the basketball and pump were probably the smartest things we packed the whole trip. We would get into community. The boys would fill up the basketball and head to the park and would immediately meet teenagers, immediately make connections. Often that's what led to invitations into homes or into restaurants, or it's where our first connections were made. So the basketball was probably the most important thing we took on the trip. And everything else, you know, anywhere in the world you can buy shorts or a t-shirt, deodorant, shampoo. So I really wasn't worried about packing because I knew we'll just replace stuff or buy stuff when it runs out. Mm-hmm. And with having older kids, they know more what they're going to want to wear for a year than what I necessarily would. So packing was simple. So
was there anything you missed? You know, you hear the comforts of home. What did you miss? That is a good question.
I think early on, we started in Morocco, and we were there for a month. We missed our coffee machine. Morocco has a lot of mint tea, which we loved. I think I missed my espresso machine. But after a month, you kind of just form new habits. Mm-hmm. So we didn't have anything. My boys missed their gym membership. But other than that, I think after that first month, we just got used to new things and new routines. If anything, now that we're home, we talk about things we miss from other places. That's been the bigger shift.
Okay, that's really cool. And I'm glad you mentioned staying in a hostel and, you know, probably several hostels, because that is such an affordable way to go and stay different places. And there's so many great people that are staying at these hostels that you can, you know, visit with and find out about their story and learn from them too, different travelers. But that, I think you stayed in some really beautiful hostels. So,
Hostels are super affordable. And as a large family, they usually have bunk rooms. So we would rent or reserve, if it's a bunk room for 7 or 8, we would just reserve the whole bunk room. So we would have our whole space just ourselves. There's the community kitchen. Hostels were a great way to connect with other travelers that would say, oh, make sure you visit this town, or that bus doesn't actually drop off there. You need to go to this place to hop on the bus. Or that's where we got some of our very best travel tips and connections. For my kids, that was where they would get to connect with other English speakers. And so being deprived of English, like conversation, they love staying in hostels because they were able to play pool with, peers being older, usually in their 20s, but we really loved hostels, and they're just so affordable.
Right. So what about, I'm glad you mentioned hearing English or speaking English. What was the language barrier like in these places?
Most places, let me think. Most places we could find a little bit of English or a few people that spoke English, but it would be very, very limited. Most of the time we used Google Translate. We fumbled through the language, even though it seems like language would be such a barrier. Like, how do you find a bus if you don't speak the language? Or it's incredible how helpful people are. I think most communities we were in, people received us with such kindness and wanted us to have a good experience in their community. We stayed in a lot of smaller towns, so when they would see our family, they knew, oh, you are not from here, but also you're here with your kids, and that doesn't happen a lot of times in a lot of places. So we just always found somebody that was willing to help us, even if they didn't speak English. We would just figure it out. It's surprisingly easy to travel in a place that you don't speak the language, if you're brave enough to make mistakes, and it requires humility too. But yeah, it was really fairly easy to navigate.
So Google Translate, and then technology, if your husband was being able to work, remotely, and then social media. I'm thinking technology is amazing. It allowed so much of this to happen, even for you to probably look up the next flight and compare that to, a train and, all of that kind of stuff. But even to where you found somebody who, or she found you, who was wanting to publish a book. So, social media and technology. So that's really amazing.
The Wi-Fi access around the world is incredible. I joke, my sister lives in Kuwait, and there was a day that I don't remember what country we were in, but it was really remote, and we were trying to FaceTime. And our connection was awesome, and she could not FaceTime because her connection in Kuwait was terrible. We had one day that Everett, our youngest, his friends were at basketball nationals, and we were in Colombia going on a hike, and he's in the back of a bus in Colombia, real remote area, watching on YouTube Live his friends play basketball, and had a fantastic connection. My oldest would track the Wi-Fi speed, I think that's what it's called, and our fastest Wi-Fi speed was in the jungle in Thailand.
Wow.
Way faster than our house. That. I mean, everywhere we went, Wi-Fi and connection in the world, it's really remote areas. We were in a desert area in Jordan. There's nothing around, and we had Wi-Fi.
So, okay. What would you say then? Because I'm thinking you saved for 17 years? 16 years?
And when I say saved, it was just little bits.
Oh, that's how it adds up.
It is.
Yeah.
Just a little bit consistently.
Yeah. Yeah, and you do have to have your whole family on board.
Yes.
With that. Yes. I will say just a little similar experience, and nothing like this, but I helped co-lead a group of Girl Scouts from kindergarten to 5th grade.
Wow.
And what we did with all of the money that we would earn and through cookie money that the troop would get, or whatever it was, we saved, and in 5th grade we were able to take the girls to Kansas City. We went to a baseball game. We went to Great Wolf Lodge, Worlds of Fun, all
of it.
this whole big trip that they didn't have to pay anything for because we saved for 6 years. And I always thought back to, because people, a lot of times don't have that patience. And you did. I mean, you really persevered. And I know some of it probably was a bigger sacrifice than other times. But to tuck that money away and be so intentional, that's how it happens.
Yeah.
That's how you get to that end dream of getting to travel for the year.
For sure. And, it's the little things, recognizing that these little decisions can add up to something big. My kids joke, I do all of my shopping at Aldi, and they always make fun of we get whatever the Aldi brand chips are, Clancy chips, I think that's what it's called, like the Tostito chips. And before we went on the trip, I figured out, okay, this is what this bag cost at Target, Tostito chips, versus the Clancy ones at Aldi, and added how many bags we buy a week times, I think I did it for 4 years or something, and it was almost a month's worth of our travel expenses just in buying the chips from Aldi versus Tostitos at Target. What it saved, because international travel is not expensive. I think a lot of people when they think of international travel, a lot of times the perspective comes from either a school trip or a church trip, and they look at that cost okay, this organization says it costs $3,000 to go to this country in South America, when the reality is you're paying for tour guides, you're paying for buses, you're paying for comfort, you're paying for all these extra things. If you want to go and travel and just experience the culture and the country, you can do it for far, far less. We took all 7 of us to Guatemala a couple months ago, and our total cost for flights, lodging, transportation, food was less than what a local school group was charging per person. Mm-hmm. And it's not that is, you just have to realize what you're paying for. So when you're traveling in a group, there's certain concerns that groups have, that if you're wanting to travel, you can do it really affordably. The cost, depending on the country, if you go to somewhere like Northern Europe, those countries are a lot more expensive. But other countries, our cost of living traveling is way less than our cost of living at home right now.
Gosh, okay. That's amazing. So when you told your family, I know that they knew, or your friends or whoever, they knew that you were thinking about this and saving and planning, but what were their reactions?
Yeah, nobody was surprised.
Okay.
I think the friends and family that know us well, most of their responses, well, if anybody can do it, it's you guys. They just know my kids and Chris and I. Our parents, my kids' grandparents, we gave them several years notice. My parents, Chris's parents, live in town. We see my mom probably every other day. I knew that they were going to have the hardest time with our trip, so we gave them a lot of leeway to process. But nobody was surprised that knows us well. I think people that don't know us were much more confused. Typically the question was, why? Why would you want to do that? So, yeah.
What was your answer?
It depends on who was asking.
Yeah.
But most of the time, I would just say, I want my kids to experience the world. For me, travel to me is kind of like studying an artist. If I want to study the work of Da Vinci, I'm not going to look at just one thing he made. I want to see the breadth of his work so I can get a full picture of this creative genius. And travel to me is a lot like that. I think of, for me, the creator, I want a full picture of his creativity. And that means experiencing, places I've never been, tasting foods I've never tasted, smelling things I've never smelled, hearing music and languages, seeing people and places that are different than I've ever seen before, is experiencing more of his creativity and giving me a fuller picture of who God is. And Chris and I wanted our kids to have that fuller picture of the world, and that it's not what it's always painted out to be. I think a lot of times the world is painted as dangerous, unsafe, and just like there's dangerous and unsafe places in Tulsa, that's true of places around the world, but it's also very true that the world is full of incredible beauty, both in people and culture and in nature. Sometimes we think, oh, I want to see the beauty of the world, and we just think, I want to see a beautiful sunset or beach. But the people in the world are just as beautiful, and getting to experience the people and, you know, the naturalness of the world. It's beautiful and exciting, and we wanted our kids to experience that and know that.
That's amazing. Do you think any trip's going to match up? I mean, you went to Guatemala, but
we went to Guatemala 6 months after we returned from our trip, and it was really fun to see how my whole family just jumped back in. For that trip, we didn't even do carry-on backpacks. It was 10 days, and we told the kids, you get a personal item, which is like the size of a small purse. But for us to do a carry-on bag, it was going to be about $1,000 more total. And all of my kids were like, we don't need a whole backpack for 10 days. We'll save the $1,000 and put it towards food in Guatemala or something like that. So we just jumped back in. We're headed to Oaxaca, Mexico soon. And yeah, we'll never do a trip like we did before, because it was a year and my kids have their own adventures. But they are constantly looking at plane deals and constantly giving me ideas of, hey, we should visit here. Or, there's this festival this time of year in this place. We should try to do that one day. So I think international travel will always be part of our family dynamic, but never to the extent it was that year.
Yeah. Well, you showed you could do it. You saved up, and that's what you wanted to do, and you've done it. I feel like you can check that off your list and now go, even when you're going somewhere for a month. Mm-hmm. That's more than most people. For sure.
And I love my kids know that they can do it. You could put any of my kids on a plane and it could land anywhere in the world, and they would figure out how to exchange money. They would figure out how to get on a bus. They would figure out where their hostel's at. Maybe not my youngest. She's 13. It would make her nervous. But the other 4, I think they would walk into any country with confidence, and it's exciting to see. It's fun to see. Yeah. My rule for them now is like, if you go, you have to take me.
Love that. Yes. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So in wrapping up, I have a theme, grow more in 2024. And so I don't know if you have something that you're personally working on. I don't know even what you could say, because you've already gone on this year-long adventure. You've written a book that's going to be published, but is there anything right now, personally or professionally, that you're working on that you'd want to share?
I am working on Spanish. I realized as we traveled, my husband's super brave to just dive in and try speaking any language, and I can understand Spanish and I can read it, but speaking it, I get nervous that I'm going to mess up. I'm not going to say the right thing. And I've met so many adults here in Tulsa, the Tulsa area, that English is not their first language. And they're so brave. They're at grocery stores and they are asking questions and they're learning English and bravely trying it in public places. And I'm so challenged and inspired by that bravery. Chris and I are diving into some bilingual communities here in Tulsa, English-Spanish communities, and I want to be able to communicate. But language, I don't know what it is for me. Learning to speak Spanish is a big, just feels like this big hurdle. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm wanting to grow in my language skills to use here in Tulsa in my home community, but also for more travel one day.
Okay, that's really cool. I feel like being curious, about different people, different cultures, different languages, all of that probably also goes into wanting to speak a different language and really connect on a different level. So yeah, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me with this conversation. It's been so fun. I feel like I have so many more questions, but when the book comes out, I'll have you come back and we'll talk again. But thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I appreciate you being here. And don't forget to connect with me on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Sharing Passion and Purpose, and Twitter at Passion Sharing. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.